Hi guys, welcome to week 2. I hope you love delving deeply into discovering what it is you truly love to do, what brings you the most joy and freedom. For me, it's really simple. I love getting out in nature on my bike, running, walking, even yoga hiking, which is very new to me but amazing. Everyone's passions are different. However, when you discover what you love to do, feel like a child again, so embrace it with both hands. This week is all about taking 100% responsibility, which is fundamental to creating a successful life. You are creating your experiences, your successes, the quality of your relationships, and your health by your thoughts and beliefs. Beliefs are no more than thoughts you've conditioned yourself to think over and over, the visual images you focus on internally and externally, and the resulting emotions that they create and your actions. And you have total control over all three of these. In order to achieve complete and full self-esteem, we have to take full responsibility for our lives, for both our internal and external experiences. Often we fall into the trap of blaming other people for how we feel or for what happens to us. Looking for the solutions to our problems outside of ourselves distracts us. It's more effective, however, to look inside ourselves to see how we are creating what we're experiencing through our thoughts, images, and behaviours. Taking the position that we're responsible for our responses to the world gives us more power. Personal responsibility is the key attitude for personal empowerment. It is to your full advantage to assume full responsibility for the circumstances in your life as well as your reactions to these circumstances. Therefore, without self-judgment or self-blame, you can focus your attention on understanding yourself and your range of choices that may be possible in any given circumstances. With this awareness, you can make educated, intentional choices. For example, I made the choice well over 10 years ago not to watch TV, read the newspaper, or listen to the news. It's generally all bad news anyway. It was at the same time that I filed for divorce. My first husband had a very negative view on the world and insisted that watching the news was mandatory. I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life. We all have the choice to do something different. So dive on in and see where you can take more responsibility in your life. At 31 years old, Forrest's life was right on track. He owned 3 homes and 7 businesses. He'd been married for 7 years to a beautiful woman and had a 2-year-old son. He was on top of the world. That is, until his world turned upside down, literally. He was in a car accident that threw his car end over end 3 times, leaving him with a catastrophic brain injury. Suddenly, Forrest found himself incapable of doing even the simplest tasks, with his beautiful wife now teaching him to brush his teeth and comb his hair. Although he knew he was lucky to be alive, he began to spiral faster and faster into a deeper pit of depression, anger, and despair. In the beginning, like a stroke survivor, he had difficulty conversing on even the most basic level. His humiliation rendered him housebound, and soon fatigue and apathy dominated his existence. For hours, Forrest lay on the sofa, sleeping or watching television. The doctors, his speech therapist, his occupational therapist, his physical therapist, essentially all of the experts told him that returning to a productive life with the promise of success wasn't possible. So Forrest gave up all hope of ever having a normal existence, let alone a life that fulfilled his dreams. Then one day, as he lay in bed, numbly surfing TV channels, the words, "If you want to get from where you are to where you want to be," caught his attention. Forrest sat up enough to focus on what the news anchor was saying. Jack Canfield was coming up next to discuss his book, The Success Principles. With the smallest spark of hope ignited, Forrest bought the book they were talking about, the first edition of The Success Principles. At the time, Forrest was just learning to read his son's books, a 35-year-old man reading books for a kindergarten. His speech therapist thought a 400-page book was being overly ambitious, but Forrest was more than ready to get from where he was to where he wanted to be, and so he began his journey. In the beginning, reading even a single page was slow and laborious. Though he was motivated, Forrest began to wonder if his therapist had been right. Maybe he was being overly ambitious. Then, several months after starting to work his way through the Success Principles, and a full 5 years after the accident, he got his biggest wake-up call. At his son Hunter's 7th birthday party, Forrest was out in the yard with the boy and a group of his friends as Hunter opened his presents. Picking a round-shaped package from the pile, Hunter ripped the wrapping paper off to reveal a baseball. Smiling with delight, he immediately threw it at the ground. Naturally, the ball landed with a thud and rolled a couple of feet into the dirt. Hunter picked it up and held it at the ground again, where it once more rolled away from him. Before he could try again, the friend who'd given him the baseball shouted, "Hunter, baseballs don't bounce." In that moment, Forrest was thunderstruck as the impact of his absence hit him like a ton of bricks. How could his son know about such things? They'd never thrown a baseball together. Forrest realised he'd spent more time with his negative thoughts than with his own son, essentially abandoning him as well as his wife. He knew that if he didn't take charge of his life, it would end up in pieces. He'd find himself divorced, homeless, or worse. The spark inside him turned into a blaze. He went back to the first of the success principles. Take 100% responsibility for your life. And he tackled it with earnest. In his case, taking 100% responsibility for his life meant he had to stop the negative self-talk. No more poor Forrest, and why did this happen to me? Without that constant negative soundtrack to distract him, Forrest could see that he hadn't been an active participant in his own rehabilitation. He'd been letting his physical therapist stretch him, then wondered why he wasn't getting stronger. He'd sat there passively listening while his speech therapist read to him, then complained that his reading skills weren't getting any better. Now Forrest started to believe that his life could be different, that he could make it different. And that's when things really started to change. Almost immediately, his self-awareness began to grow. Things that had gone over his head for so long finally registered. Where were all his friends? The answer was as painful as it was clear. He'd abandoned them in the same way he'd abandoned his family. Everyone had stopped calling long ago, pushed away by Forrest's negativity, and he'd been too self-absorbed to care. Just noticing these things was a success in itself. Forrest reminded himself he was making progress. Next, he decided to give up blaming and complaining. Not an easy task. It had become so habitual that Forrest didn't even realise he was doing it. So he asked the people around him to become aware when he was slipping back into his old ways. In fact, his wife and therapist had a sign. If Forrest began to blame or complain, they let him know by pulling on their ear. When he saw that, he'd stop whatever he was saying in mid-sentence, take a deep breath, and consider his next words more carefully. Not that speaking positively or negatively was easy for him. Forrest still hadn't fully regained his speech faculties, and sometimes he was unable to find the words he needed, or he stuttered. Because of this, he didn't want to go to the grocery store or post office in case he ran into someone he knew. To counter this, he focused on Principle 22, practice persistence. Each day he read the success principles for 20 minutes and practiced stepping out of his comfort zone. Day after day he practiced a little more and went a little further. One of his steps out of his comfort zone took him to a local coffee shop. For years, Forrest had put his head down and walked past the coffee shop, keeping his eyes glued to the cement. But this day he walked in, reminding himself of Principle 15, experience your fear and take action anyway. Unfortunately, he was met right away by his worst fear. An old acquaintance recognised him and called out. Although he was cringing with embarrassment inside, Forrest stayed calm and walked over and sat down. He explained as best he could what had been happening to him. He was amazed to find it actually felt good to stand up for himself. In the coming days, Forrest tried this with others, and with time, talking got easier. He discovered there were people around him who were willing to support him, especially now that Forrest was willing to support himself. This insight helped him to overcome the shame he'd been carrying for so long. As time passed, he could hardly believe the new successes he was having. Within a year of applying the principles, Forrest was doing all of the things his doctor had said he'd never do again. He returned to school, he got off all of his medications, both for pain and depression. He started volunteering, he started turning every negative into a positive, and he's been doing that ever since. Today it's hard to believe there was a time not that long ago that Forrest couldn't speak fluently, nor read or write very well. But he turned that around so completely that he wrote a book about his experiences. As a result, he gets almost daily requests to share his story in front of audiences. And while he never would have believed it possible during the dark days, today he loves public speaking and believes he's found the work he was meant to do. He's thrilled to travel and speak to groups around the world. Reading the Success Principles also shifted Forrest's thinking about success in general. Before the accident, success to him meant more money and more things, a bigger house, a bigger boat, opening more businesses, owning more stuff. After the accident, he'd given up on ever attaining any success, however you define it. Today, thanks to the Success Principles, he's learned the profound truth that having all the stuff in the world doesn't mean anything if you're not truly living, which Forrest now knows mean giving and receiving love. If currency were counted in friends and love, Forrest would be the richest man in the world.